The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Smiling Human podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Kyle Smith. Kyle Smith is a clarity consultant and developer of Neuro-Linguistic Somatic Experiencing. This is a unique technique that I, in fact, had the pleasure and the privilege of experiencing myself, and we dive into that into the episode as well. Kyle is on a mission to defeat the victim mentality through a practical mindset coaching system for people who want to overcome negative narratives and empower themselves to take action and become more in control of their lives so as to optimize their mental well-being. Being that I did go through his NLSE, as he calls it, I can say firsthand that it is a remarkably potent experience and something that I would encourage anyone interested to check out. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Fantastic. Kyle, it's been great to get to know you in the past couple of weeks here, and I'm quite excited to have you on the show. So thanks for being here.
Likewise, we have had a solid chunk of awesome conversations, so I'm very excited to finally get to record one.
Mm-hmm. And in light of that, I'll ask you the question I ask all guests at the head of the show. What's the last thing that made you smile?
Honestly, I smile pretty often, so even right now in this moment, I'm smiling. So I would say being here, chilling, being present. Being present always comes with smiles. Yeah.
Glorious. So the listeners would have got a little sneak peek into your background through the intro of the bio at the head of the episode, but what they might not know is that I actually was lucky enough through your graciousness to experience your Neuro-Linguistic Somatic Experiencing offerings and the internal magic, so to say, that you do. So I'd love to start the show if you would share with us what exactly is Neuro-Linguistic Somatic Experiencing and how did you come to crafting this particular methodology?
Totally. Neuro-linguistic somatic experience is a outcomes focused practice rather than a problems focused practice. So we're looking at solving problems. We're looking at resolving rather than continuing issues. And breaking down or actually having, in a nutshell, it's a mindset gym for mental fitness. So we're developing our mental fitness. And as we develop our mental fitness, we develop our mindset. And going into the breakdown of NLSE, neuro, meaning of the mind, not just of the mind, but also the nervous system. And being able to go into increasing our idea of our mindset. So I define mindset as the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves or our opinion of ourselves. And so when we have a practical working definition, that allows us a reference point to compare. So we could have a day where we're feeling a little higher about ourselves. It's a good day. We could feel a little lesser about ourselves. Oh shit. And then we can adjust accordingly. So we can have a pretty decent relationship with ourselves. And then that goes into linguistics, language, what we say, think, write, and how we breathe, because the breath is the language of the body. Going with the first three, words to me are the ethereal macronutrients of the mind. And a macronutrient is a building block. So for food, we have our carbs, fats, and proteins, and those build up the body. And the quality of what we consume is going to influence the outcome of the body. The quality of the food is going to be better for us if we're eating higher quality food. It's going to be simpler. If we're eating lower quality food, it's not going to have as good of an impact. And so the words that we speak work as the ethereal macronutrients of the mind, where high quality words will give us high quality thoughts, while shit quality words is going to yield shit quality thoughts. And so when we get around our thinking about our thinking, we're able to figure out which words feel a certain way and articulate ourselves with more solid talk, more solidity. And then how the breath is the language of the body. If we're breathing high and tight and we're holding our breath in our chest, we're good to fight. If we're breathing low and slow into our belly, we're good to flow. So if we're in a situation where our environment is safe and we feel our upregulated breath high in the chest, we can take a second and think, okay, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why am I breathing up into my chest? Let's look around. No, things are good. Okay. Yeah, we're vibing. And then you could take an inhale, take an exhale, and down regulate. And so the breath is a way for us to listen to how our body's feeling and then be able to recognize it and down regulate and calm ourselves down. And so that ties into the somatic aspect, the soma of the body. And that is where we get the breath involved, where we're activating it, we're neutralizing, we're down regulating, we're up regulating, we're whatever the outcome is that we want for that particular moment, we're going to pick the type of breath style for it. And this gets the conversation between our brain and our body real in sync. They're having a good conversation. It's the autonomic nervous system, which is responsible for everything that's on autopilot. It's passive. And if we cut our finger, we're going to just heal. It's going to do it by itself. We don't need to actually be involved in the process of it. And then we can use the breath to engage our energetic body, our emotional body, emotion, energy, emotion. And we can get these flowing like a wave, like an ocean back and forth, where we're consciously involved with our breathing, which we don't often need to be. However, the lungs and our breath is the only part of the autonomic nervous system we can consciously influence. I can't sit here and be like, hold on 2 seconds. Yeah, I just paused my heartbeat. Totally did it. That's very unlikely. Our breath we can control and we can influence and we can change our state of being. And I also like to think of breathwork and using the breath as a tool. We shift from being a thermometer where we are reacting to the internal and external stimuli. We shift over to being a thermostat where we can regulate ourselves and we can adjust our internal temperature to our preferred liking, our own little Goldilocks zone. And the difference between the energetic body and the emotional body is, although the physical body has passive ways of doing things, it's time bound. So eventually everything will heal or things will recover. Our energetic body is timeless. It can take experiences from the past and bring them into the present. And if we're not getting those processed and we're not actively participating in the processing of these unmetabolized emotions, these unmetabolized stories, they linger, they build up, they create dis-ease, they create fatigue, they anchor us down, preventing us from going towards what we want to do. And so when we can process those, when we can alleviate that through the words, through the breath, and through the stories, then it goes to E, experience, where you experience that real time. So it's pretty cool. And that's my TED Talk.
So I will say that yours is the first offering that I've encountered that could be described as the amalgamation or transfusion of pieces that I use in my own life. Listeners may know that I wrote a book in 2013 called What in the Word? Uncovering the Art of Speech and the Power of Language. If you're curious about it, I can throw a link in the show notes as well. It's also in my Instagram bio. And in that book, I explore where the power of language comes from and how we can apply it to ameliorate our own lives and society. And so when we're talking about the experience through the soma, powered by language in the nervous system, I would describe that as the intersection of the material and the immaterial. And it's a really important intersection to pay attention to because it's one that is often lost in common parlance and common understanding, especially when it comes to the genuine and authentic power that each individual has. When you were speaking, Kyle, a lot of things came to my mind. I've taken a few notes here. When you're talking about the macronutrients of the mind, it's interesting terminology. A nutrient is something that brings life, something that provides the building blocks for growth, for nourishment, for expansion. And when we think about words this way, we have to acknowledge, if we're going to accept your premise, which I do, that words are nutrients for the mind, that words contain within them the same life force that any other nutrient for the body or mind or soul might have. And so if this is the case, then there is the entire possibility that we could be taking in, like you said, junk words, junk food. And I wanted to drill down on this a little bit because there's a nuance here that I think deserves to be parsed apart. And what I mean by this is that we would do good by the audience and by each other to be more clear in the definition of this particular area. And that is when we're talking about quality words or value words or nutrient words, life affirming speech, these kinds of things. What the heck are we actually talking about? Well, what I'll pose to you what I think it is, and then you tell me what you think about it.
Cool.
Most recently, I've been reading a book by David Bohm called Wholeness and the Implicate Order. And it's an extraordinarily good book. It's a book that I've been waiting to read since I wrote my book. I read parts of it for my research for the book, but I hadn't actually had a physical copy to sit down and dive into. And in the opening parts of this book, he talks about the necessity of a self-world view, self-world view. You talked about viewing self, and the self-world view is not actually distinct. There's no worldview and self-view. It's a self-world view. And that this self-world view that you have, listener, is comprised of a series of beliefs, of expectations, of memories that are encoded in language, but also encoded in the felt experience, like you alluded to, Kyle, in the soma, in the organs, inside the nervous system and the tissues in a way that programs us for a level of expectancy and predisposes us to a quality of habit of speech and action. And you go, okay, well, how the hell does this relate to high quality words? Well, let me tell you. We can imagine that if we are working with a framework, a self-world view that has in it implicit falsity, that is to say, we have a misconception about the real nature of self, the real nature of world, then the way that we are going to be living is going to be incongruent or in dissonance with the source of life called nature. And so now when we're talking about language and truth, we have to also take into account, and this is where I'll finish this and pass it off to you, that there's true statements, but I would hazard that no statement beyond I am encompasses full ultimate truth. And that this is where the intersection actually lies between the material and the immaterial, is at the source of being or the experience of unique and individuated self as body, as mind.
Damn, I really dig that. I really like the idea of the self-world view, and I would. Okay, I'm gonna ponder it for a second. What I'm seeing is I'll toss this one in there too, because the way I frame things as well is that the world that we perceive is a projection of our reflection. Both the characteristics that we admire and resent in others, we can only recognize if we see them in ourselves. So if we have a self-world view, and the words are working to, because the words are going to work to fulfill what we see, and it's going to find evidence. Our subconscious is going to find, our reticular activating system is going to find evidence to say that our point of view is accurate or is true, although it may not be accurate. Because I think there's with truth, there's accuracy. And so I do think that it's the intertwining between the subjective and the objective. And I believe when we are objectively aware of our subjective existence, then what happens is we get to see a third party. So we adopt both the frame of the subjective individual, the self world view, as well as the further worldly view, the world. Yeah, it would be the self world view. Yeah, that would line up. That's how. Yeah, I really like that. Totally. I'm not
This
sure if I
makes me
answered
think
the
of
question on that one.
no, there was no question,
Okay,
just
sweet,
the emergence, right? This is the
sweet.
exploration. You and I operate in very similar spheres, and I think it's important to allow space for what arises in response, right? This is the same energetic, life-giving power of words is what is evocative in discourse. It's is the whole
Mm-hmm.
reason I started this show. And when you're talking about the projection of reflection, it's an interesting piece because we start to get to the start of the bridge of story work, where the architecture of our self world view is story. It has the hero, it has the villain, it has the dragon and the treasure and the maiden and the wounding and the fear and the accomplishment. It has the jack of all trades. It has the brother, it has the magician, the secret knowledge, that which becomes revealed, all of these different archetypes, right? And what's fascinating about this projection of reflection is that although I agree to what you have said, I think that there's an addition that needs to be added because when I've encountered people who say this, like, well, whatever you see in the world is what you see in yourself, that's not wholly and specifically accurate from my point of view. And I would
Oh,
add only
yeah,
one
fair.
caveat, right? Which is to say that we don't necessarily need to embody a quality in our
Mm-hmm.
personality or our temperament in order to recognize it in someone else. But what we recognize is the memory of the encounter, and that memory is a branch of the individual person, the individual conscious experience. So, a very clear
Mm.
example of this would be an encounter with malevolence.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever encountered someone who is genuinely cruel,
Mm.
malevolent, antisocial, and villainous in this sense, just because you can spot that in someone else doesn't mean that you are a villain or malevolent. But it does mean that you have taken in that, incorporated it into your self worldview as something that is recognizable, discernible, and ought to be avoided, and then are capable of moving forward with it. And so when we're talking about story, let's bring it back to the applicable here because there's a beautiful expansive space, but it's also really important, I think, for listeners to understand the feet on the ground approach that you're actually bringing to it. And so I'd love to explore if you could tell me more about how breath work works as that vehicle. Why is it so important that breath work is involved in this kind of neuro-linguistic experiencing?
Oh, goddamn.
It's okay, we can pause and cut here.
Okay. Finish. Start with the sentence, and I'll be able to go fresh from there, or the question mark.
Can you tell us more about how and why the breath is so important for this mental rewiring and the restoring?
Yes, absolutely. Uh, so getting the physical body involved and the emotional body, and getting using the breath as a tool to connect the mind and the body. What we're able to do is flush out the feels through the breath. So we can do breath work while it's as a practice to get us going. And then we can also do the breathing and reading where breath and the story is integrated together. And when we get the breath involved, it allows us to get a physiological sigh. It allows us to just release the breath and allow it to do its thing and push the intensity of the emotions around to make it a lot easier.
I can hear you, but the camera is
Okay, so you can't hear me
glitching in an
like
interesting
real
way. It's
time
sort
right
of
now.
delayed by.
Okay.
I
Oh,
mean, I can hear you,
okay, cool. Sorry.
um,
So that,
but the audio or the video is deeply out of sync.
yeah, I think that might fix on export because it is just my internet being slow on the side. However, I can still hear you. So yeah, that's
Okay.
how integrating the breath into the stories allow for a little bit more processing.
Hmm. One of the words that comes to mind, both having gone through the experience with you as well as operating in the realm of theory, is the word enervate.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the idea that we can grow new nerves, essentially, nerves reaching out into new places. And so the idea of enervation and of neuroplasticity is, I think, really at the heart of the work that you're speaking to and at the heart of the power of intentional story making for self and rewriting these stories, unlocking the emotions. And what I think I want to emphasize for people is that the power of the will is what unlocks the essential efficacy of this kind of story work, this kind of breath work, this kind of intersection, which is to say that, as Kyle noted early in the episode, the breath is the only part of our autonomic nervous system that we have volitional influence over or control over. And as a result, we're actually activating our brain in a different way. We are accessing different aspects of our nervous system and have the ability to essentially become the guide, the cave explorer, the ship's captain, such that we can use our power of choice and volition not only to navigate to the points where we might find this kind of stuck energy, but also then to apply this life giving force of breath in conjunction with a story that is life affirming, that is liberating, that is oriented towards the authentic, full potentiality of the person, to combine for an experience that literally changes the physiology. This is how we change our minds and how we change our bodies. And I don't think it can be understated just how powerful that is.
Yeah, man, that's sweet. That's such a great share, and I've never heard that word before. Enervate. That is new to me, and I freaking love it because it is beautiful how we're creating new neural pathways and we're healing or creating new nervous, like that's it's unreal. That's going with first principles thinking. That's going to the root. That's going to the source.
This brings up the essence of mindfulness, I think, when you're talking about first principles and the power by which we unlock our voice and mind, is that all of this, all of the potency of breath work by itself, all the potency of story work by itself, all the potency of the neuro-linguistic somatic experience crossover is a present moment experience. And I think that needs to be emphasized as well, is that for those who have struggled by the weight of old stories, cycles, habits, recapitulated and difficult emotional triggers, there is an opportunity for liberation from these in a meaningful way, and that the locus of that liberation is in the present, and that where we rewrite the stories is in the present, where we feel and then let move these energy in motion, these emotions, is in the present. And so there's a call to attention, a call to focus, a call to deepening, not just in the mind, because when sometimes we think focus is mental, I'm going to focus on something, but mindfulness is a full body commitment. Mindfulness is a full body activity. And so sometimes we might think that we've solved something, but unless we are deeply willing to confront courageously the stories that live in the dark crevices of our body, our nervous system, whatever it may be, this is where we might find that kind of spiritual bypassing. So what tools alongside this story work and this breath work have you seen to be effective in bringing the attention into the body and feeling in that safe way?
Oh man. So one that comes to mind immediately is cannabis connected breathwork, story work, or cannabis connected NLSE sessions. That's been a really cool combination because the cannabis puts you into a gamma state, so you're more receptive and you're more grounded. And taking it from like how it feels, it's also a feminine plant. You can only get the THC from the female plant. It's a very warm, it's compassionate, and that's what that plant is most known for, or used for as a practice. So when we are able to combine the cannabis and then that exploration of the self, and then being able to fully experience it, because we have that openness to feel and to connect with the cannabis, and so it creates an environment where it supercharges the whole experience more. So it doesn't make it things quicker or slower. It supercharges the experience as a whole. It opens things up smoother. And another couple of styles I want to do is I want to do a sound bath integrated NLSE session. I also want to do a psilocybin integrated NLSE session. Oh yeah, more of them. And then and those ones I think those are my two favorites, where it's the cannabis and the psilocybin, and then the other ones I want to explore, and I believe that they'll have a really cool effect, because I purposefully made this practice so it can interconnect with other modalities, other practices towards healing. So it could be NLSE therapy, NLSE personal training, NLSE this, because we're going to the source. So anyone can adopt the practice to be able to supercharge their existing practice and be able to move things through smoother.
Yeah, the plant medicines can be deeply supportive to the rewiring or accessing of these deeper aspects of our nervous system. That's entirely true. As some insight for the listeners, the reason why Kyle laughed when he said psilocybin is because the session that he and I did, I had a microdose that day as well, along with some lion's mane and some ginseng for the activation of the energy body. So it was highly effective. It's not the first time that I've used microdosing psilocybin to rewire and restore. There's a blog on my website as well about how I use that to support some of the difficulties I was having with being neurodivergent. And so it's well known to me the capacity of intentional presence work, story work, mindfulness work, language work, and these different types of plant medicines. One thing I will note when you talked about NLSE and these different places that it can show up, this makes me think of state changes, that our story is related to our states. So if you go around every single day saying, I am a magnet for blessings, great things happen to me all the time, I meet amazing people, my world opens before me in abundance and brilliance, and no matter what's happening, everything's always working out for me. Mm-hmm. If you said that to yourself every day, you're going to feel a particular way. You might feel like you're trying to dupe yourself. You might feel like a little weird at first, but eventually there's going to be a noticeable state change, because those words contain within them an affirmation of abundance, the negation of scarcity, and the indication of ease. And say, okay, what do I mean by this, and where am I going in terms of state changes? Well, in order to anchor in these kinds of story shifts, they have to, in my personal opinion, I might be wrong, tell me what you think, they have to be present at multiple instances of different states. So when I'm lifting, and I'm getting that last Arnold press out of me, if I can say I am a magnet for abundance, okay, now boom, I've wired that same aspect that was deep in the cannabis session or deep in the breathwork session into a new moment, into a new branch of my nervous system, and I'm enervating. I am linking more of the nervous system in affirmation of that particular idea. So working out, I think, is a really, really powerful way to do this. Bringing affirmations into fitness is huge because not only is the nervous system working in a different way, but the hormones are working in a different way. And what most people don't realize is that mood regulation, our capacity to envision a meaningful future, to be hopeful, those are all regulated by hormones. And that not only does exercise modulate our hormones, but our thoughts have an impact on our hormones as well. That if we are living in a world continually repeating why everyone is the aggressor, why we're the victim, why it's hopeless. Oh my God, I even just saying that. I'm like, ugh, I want to like fall over. It drains the energy from the body. And so there is this impetus. And what I love so much about your work, Kyle, is the intersection of the material and the immaterial. I keep harping on that. But before we go too much further, let's take a short break and we'll come back with the second half of the show. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about just how you can help this show grow into the future. Did you know that we have an Instagram, a YouTube, and a Patreon? Probably. But if you're listening on YouTube, like many of you are, I would invite you to subscribe, to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and to leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you have any questions or maybe guests that you want me to interview. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any other podcast platform, then please take this moment to rate the show. All of these actions go a long way to helping the Smiling Human podcast reach more people and grow into the future. Thank you so much. Excellent. Well, we're back now and to the second half of the show, which means it's time for the question of the week. This is where I invite our guests to bring forward an inquiry, something that's meaningful to them, that they want to share with the audience, or perhaps they want to pitch to me to see what comes of that. So, Kyle, what have you got for us this week?
The question I have, and I can tell a story along with it, to prep it. So I was out for a walk, which I do often. That's where I do all my best thinking. And this question popped up where it just zoomed in and I felt it as well. I remember vividly, it was summertime. I was on the promenade. It was a beautiful day. I was smoking a joint. And then I felt like it started in the gut, right in here, right in the solar plexus. And it like had a pulse. And then the thought come up. And the question that arose from this moment that has very heavily influenced my life was, what is the truest truth? And when this question popped up, I don't look at it as I have to find what the truest truth is. What I created in pursuit of trying to come up with an answer has been interesting. I was able to, from this point, create a different frame where if I wanted to understand what the truest truth was, that would not be only subjective, that would be objective. It would be an objective measure as well. I originally had objective, now I see it where it's more the duality between objective and subjective, because when we're finding the truest truth, it's zooming things down to the common denominator. Where do things interlink? Where are the truths in all of these different aspects? And how can we figure out what the truest truth is? Or going in first person, how could I figure out what the truest truth is? Just if I'm doing it for fun. And it influenced a frame that I see the world through, and it's through a frame of art, science, and magic. Art being what we are capable of creativity. And art is subjective. It could be building a building. It could be painting art. It could be doing snow angels, whatever. It's the creative component that we all have in common that has created the environment to serve us rather than us be at the whims of the environment. Then we go into science, which is the way I have fun with it, is that science is magic that's quantified. There's science and there's mathematics to it, and there's statistics. Magic is science that we don't understand yet. And so through this interlocking trifecta, I'm able with that started with the truest truth. It's developed a frame and a lens where I'm seeing less while seeing more. And it's been interesting. So that's been my idea and my experience with that particular question. So the floor is yours, Oak.
I'm sure there is not a more relevant and important question to anyone seeking to understand the nature of human existence. And the fact that it has shown up now on this show is not surprising and quite delightful. So thank you, Kyle. Allow me to offer a story in response before delivering the answer. When I was in my first few years of university, I used to go to parties, not that I was particularly a drinker or, the life of the party in any sort of sense, but socializing is nice and it's nice to have friends. So I would go out from time to time, and I liked to find people in the room or in the bar who looked particularly skeptical, maybe even cynical, who have that kind of look on their face. And I would approach them very nonchalantly and say to them, I have a self-evident and universal truth, and I can tell it to you in 4 words. Some people are intrigued. They think I'm setting up for a punchline, and other people would look at me like, this guy's got to be on drugs. There's no way. Like, what is he talking about? And they go, okay, tell me. Sure. This is, I am. So what do we mean by this? This is what I would offer in response to your question. This is, I am. The intersection of all truths that are discernible and intelligible consciously have their common root in their being, that they are. The quality of what they are is founded on the fact that they are. If they were not, they could not be different or same from each other in any other way. So when we're looking for the truest truth, it is non-informative because it's so glaringly obvious and simple that it actually doesn't take us anywhere through the intellect or through the mind. So when we're looking to find a truth that, say, takes us out of suffering, or a truth that would allow us to live in greater abundance or to reshape the stories that we have carried with us, this is not it. This doesn't really take us anywhere, but the consequence of it does. And what I mean by this is, well, knowing that you exist doesn't change how you feel about your existence. But understanding that all power, all life is an eminent quality of being means that your creative power to bring forward thought, mind, and action into being means that you stand as the gatekeeper of a very, very potent and universal energy. And it's this very energy that we use to rewrite our stories, that we use to make art, that has been described as magic when people are capable of accomplishments far beyond the societal imagination. And so the truest truth is being, but the wisdom behind that knowing is understanding the nature of being. And this is where it becomes multiplicitous, which is so funny because it's almost as though we look at a white light and we go, yeah, but what about kaleidoscopes? You ever like kaleidoscopes? It's like, certainly. We're going to change the nature of white light. We're going to change our direct perception of being when we allow ourselves to think in multiplicity. But it also allows us to apply the wisdom of that truest truth for particular ends. And particularly, the end that we're speaking to is being able to intentionally transform and create a life story and a felt embodied experience that aligns with our fulfillment of needs and our greatest desire for self.
Mm.
So this is what I would offer to you, Kyle.
Our personal lore.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, not even, it's personal and transpersonal.
True.
This
Fair.
is something that's really important to recognize, is that the nature of myth and archetype, of narrative and history, even the nature of the mystical, is in part encoded in language. And so any building blocks that we use to generate a story for ourselves or about our family or about our life is going to be encoded in a software, for lack of a better term, that is universal. And I mean universal. It's not that English is universal, sure, but language, sound, the cymatic creative potential of acoustic vibration, that's universal. And that's something that is transpiring both inside and outside the body during the act of speech. And so there's, just like there was an intersection between the material and the immaterial when we were speaking about the potency of your work, I think too that there is an important intersection to highlight between the personal and the transpersonal. That your personhood, what you think you are, who you think you are, is mutable. And it's mutable to the extent that you get to change it.
Mm-hmm.
How interesting. How empowering. Isn't that exciting?
So much opportunity there, it is cool, and it is true where there is that personal and that transpersonal, where it's going further beyond. And a way that I like to think of this as well is my fun little idea of the universe, where as above so below, as within so without, how we are made up of the same matter of the universe. We have the same components built up within us, just like how we're on this planet doing things. Within us there's bacteria, there's organisms. That sole purpose is the same sole purpose as every living thing, and that's survive. It's trying to survive. So then I think, where if we have the same hardware, where it's the physical body, and we're both sourced from this, or you and I, or any human being is sourced from the same point in time, and we developed and we're here, we're still made up of the same hardware. And it's been billions of years of development in order for us to get here. So I would say that the thing that separates us at the base is our consciousness. It is our unique perception of the world. And when I think of, there's a universal consciousness, the all is mind. When we have that universal consciousness and we bring it down, bring it down a couple levels to the internal world, then the consciousness is the internal world's, or the internal universe is, quote unquote, source. It is their God that they worship, is our consciousness. And so I think that how our bodies are a universe within itself, that connects us with the universe abroad as well.
It brings to mind the difference between eminence and encapsulation, where when we talk about an internal world, the idea that our consciousness is somehow inside of our body alone, rather than emanating from or through or as, is a meaningful distinction. Because if we're thinking about encapsulation, now it's almost like we're a soul trapped in a meat suit trying to fix the meat suit from the inside out. But if we think about it as a form of eminence, then we're looking at the truth that the power that allows for all creation is emanating through and as the body, and that our will is one quality of that. And I want to bring this beautiful sort of expanded spectrum back and loop this in, because you're talking about the base constituents of biology and how we have the common drive to survive, and I would add to reproduce. Well, the cell is the smallest indivisible unit of life, of self-replicating life. And at the heart of the cell, obviously, we have the DNA. Okay, well, what we have learned, and I did some research this week using AI tools, which I don't know how I have ever lived doing research without them. My goodness.
Yeah.
At the intersection between something called the Baldwin effect and epigenetics. So I don't want to get too far out, so I'll distill it as quickly as I can and as simply as I can for the listeners. The Baldwin effect is an effect that has been measured that shows that learned behavior among organisms can make its way into a difference in DNA encodement. That is to say, if your great 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 grandfather learned something and taught their kids and their kids and their kids and their kids, what was once learned becomes coded in the DNA. That's the Baldwin effect. Okay. How does this relate to epigenetics, and how does this relate to the work that you do, Kyle? Well, epigenetics is this field of study that shows that there are external environmental factors that have the ability to change our phenotypical expression. Okay, what does that mean? It means that the proteins that the cells produce are different. The DNA is the same, but we can change how that DNA expresses proteins and thus builds cells and either goes cancerous or healing or produces enzymes or doesn't, all these different types of things. Okay, well, the link here between these two is that some epigenetic phenomenon can cause long-term coding differences. Mutagenesis, I think is what it's called, the changing of the DNA. How this relates to yours is that one of the factors that activates an epigenetic process is breathwork and meditation and mindfulness. And when we start to think and hold ourselves in a state that is harmonious with that source of being, that is affirmative to our life force, that feels strong or makes us go strong, in the words of David Hawkins, then we are literally changing the way that our cells respond to the environment, and we are activating the potential to not only change the proteins, but literally change the coding of our DNA and the coding of our children's DNA. So although it is a personal thing where you might be listening to this and go, okay, well, this is all well and good, but I still am struggling with relationships, or I'm still struggling with finances, or I'm still struggling with all of these things, right? The struggle is in the neuro architecture. The struggle is literally physically encoded. It's not an external event. It is fundamentally your biological oriented, the cells, how the cells are oriented inside your biology. And what I've learned through your work and what I've learned through my own research is that we can change that all the way down to the very molecular constituents of our cells. And I think that that is a deeply empowering truth to encounter.
Totally. Like we get to go down to the ones and zeros of our system and play around with the ones and zeros. Sort of. Yeah, it is crazy. And I do think it's because we have an abundance of words that we have lost track of how powerful words are. I think that's accurate. And it's cool. It's really cool and really neat being able to see and experience how the breath is the first skill that we learn when we're born, and a skill that we seldom practice throughout life. And then talking and words is the follow-up skill that we learn. Those are just like right down there. If you look at our whole skill tree, those are the like two things that we learn as skills first. It's crazy. And being able to utilize that to not only modify and mold our own DNA, I believe, and that have that be able to, of course, go forward. I think that also brings a beautiful point of being the individual in that lineage to have the courage to take on that timeline and process those words. Then you get the whole lineage to tune itself to this moment, and all of the things that happened in the past were to create the opportunity to be the person we are in this moment, to go after what we're intuitively pursuing or a problem that we're trying to solve in the world. Like, it's crazy. That was my tangent.
Well, it's deeply relatable, Kyle, because there's a book, I can't remember the author, so I would encourage the listeners to look up by the title. It's called It Didn't Start With You. And inside this book, it demonstrates the epigenetic relationship between generational trauma and present disease in the body. And like you're saying, the words, when we have lost contact with their origin, not only the etymological origin, but also the historical place where they entered into our family, where they entered into our psyche. If we don't know where these ideas, concepts, self-world views have come from, then we end up living in those currents unconsciously. And those currents will necessarily be shaping the body, shaping the mind, shaping how you parent, shaping how you love, shaping how you see the world. And what I want to encourage people, and maybe people are tired of me encouraging them to be responsible, but it is your responsibility to own this. And what an opportunity it is. It is a genuinely beautiful opportunity, although it might feel like work, and sure, it can be work. But the real payoff is that you have the power to transform how you emanate in this world through your breath, which gives life to speech, no breath, no speech, through your speech, which is comprised of the building blocks of mind, and through your actions, which are the translation of thought and value through the body into time. So there is a great opportunity for anyone out there to dive into this realm, to look at, how do I think? What am I telling myself about what's possible? What are the thoughts that occur to me most often that feel the worst? Let's look there, because those are the ones that are, in essence, generating this dis-ease. And to bring it back around to something you said in the first half, Kyle, I might liken ease to regulation and homeostasis.
Mm-hmm.
That when our body is regulated, it's operating open, in flow, receptive, sensitive, sensible, that is no different than feeling at ease. And that this dis-ease is an instantiation of dysregulation, where we are encountering at a fundamental level the idea that something is wrong or about to harm us, or that we might, very soon come to harm because of scarcity. This is all root brain concept. And so this ties back to the breath through regulation, because we regulate the nervous system through conscious breathing, but also the notion that when we choose our beliefs powered by breath, we actually encode a reference point of safety into the language of the mind, into the architecture of the neurophysiology, such that when something else comes up, we go, oh, no, wait, I am actually abundant, and I love what I do, and my life expands when I follow my joy. It's okay to be me. Wow. Huh. I don't have to be afraid anymore.
It's like a breath of fresh air, man. It's like, wow.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, truly.
It's so beautiful because it just, it dives into the way that we can adjust things, the way we can organize things. And I'm gonna rewatch this because you said something I really enjoy. It was like the narrative safety net, where it's a side effect, where it's almost like when you have that negative narrative coming in, it can autocorrect. And so we can counter that initial thought and then bring it back to, I am a badass. I am pursuing what I want to do. I am creating a life that is phenomenal. It's not, I'm inspired to wake up. Being awake is the dream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or I'm worthy of love. People recognize and appreciate me. I have a role in this world. I belong, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of this that can be self-focused. And I think too, though, it's important to recognize that a lot of these pieces that we work on alone, so to say, or in the tutelage of a mentor like yourself, are relational. Language itself is relational. The only reason we developed the capacity to speak using symbolic language is to confer ideas between people, to relay ideas. And so I would encourage, and this is where I think our work diverges just a little bit, although we share a common root, is looking at the language that shapes how we relate. This can be how we relate to ourselves, sure, but what are we telling ourselves about the other? And I really want to stress this, the other. This could be the other that is the universe, could be God, could be the no God, could be society, government, parents, lovers, ex-lovers, co-workers, bosses, anything that we have separated and dislocated from the universality of our being, although it shares that universal being. The language we have in that is going to be directly encoded in that sense of safety, or just above, because just above that reptilian brain is the relational brain, the emotive, the sensitive, the empathic aspects of our neurophysiology, which are just as much influenced by that neuro-linguistic architecture as that sense of safety, fear, and what is possible.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's freaking good. That is freaking sharp. There's a where do you find the when you're working with words, what are some, do you see themes? Do you observe themes, consistencies? Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Pattern recognition is one of my superpowers. I imagine that when you're asking about that, and tell me if this is true, that you're curious about maybe limiting themes that get in the way, themes that cause this kind of suffering. Is that the direction you're curious about, or is there something specific?
I think that's a cool one for sure. There wasn't anything specific in mind. It is how we relate to things. So I'm going with how we relate to things. What are the themes, and how to be able to, how to strengthen that relation, I suppose. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, allow me to root this down. We'll take two directions. I can speak to the patterns that I notice, and one of them is actually something that you brought up in the structure of your work, which is shoulds, the sort of a moralistic obligation towards something, or the way things ought to be. That's a big one, because not only have we set up rigidity in our worldview, but we're also now implementing a standard that may or may not be, when achieved, in alignment with our highest well-being. That's something to consider. So the shoulds are quite disempowering, and also keeps us sometimes in an oppressor duality. Well, they think I should do this, or the world thinks I should do that. I don't have any power, blah, blah, blah. Well, no, horse poop. That's not true. We can change that around by saying, I believe this is best. I will do what I believe is best. If you think you should do something, it's because you believe that it is valuable. So affirm that. This is valuable to me. I will take action to bring this value into the world. Forget the shoulds. Let's get to the source of value, which is much closer to truth than judgment is. And that's a really key piece.
Yeah.
In terms of the empowered speech for relating, or how we would improve relating, I would turn people to chapter 8, I believe, in my book, which is the qualities of sovereign speech. And the three qualities of sovereign speech are truthful, compassionate, and precise. And so when we're looking to imbue our expressed language with power, we need to be truthful. This is how we're going to elevate our relations. You say, well, how do I know that I'm truthful? It's my truth. I believe this, right? This is an important emphasis. And I don't want to get too far down in the weeds without explaining the other ones. But when we're talking about truth, there's a difference between truth and what people think their truth is. So if I say, Kyle, my truth is I'm really jealous of your hat, right? Okay. Is that true? It isn't. It's not true because I don't like your hat. I do like your hat, but it's not true because of how it's phrased.
Yeah, totally.
I could say it more true. Kyle, my truth is that I am aware of a feeling of jealousy and envy and appreciation for your hat, and the desire that I actually would really like to have one like that. That's more true.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we're talking about what is experienced. When we are articulating in affirmative and accountable language what is perceived inside awareness, that's how we get closer to truth. And this is no different than authenticity. And for those curious about authentic communication and authentic relating, look to Getting Real by Susan Campbell, another great book. Okay, the second one, compassionate. Suffering is a universal truth of humanity. All suffering is equally worthy of alleviation. All others who annoy us, are frustrated, are reactive, or violent are suffering. Remembering this is the core of the Bodhisattva's path. It's the core of the Buddhist heart. It's the core of the diamond heart, right? And when we can imbue and weave into our language the recognition that there is suffering in the world and leverage our language to support in the alleviation of that suffering, now we have imbued language with the power of love. And this is a universally harmonizing frequency. So that's the second piece. And the third is precision. To say exactly what you mean and to mean exactly what you say. This is really, really key. It's like, oh yeah, I kind of think that's rad, you know, it's like, that slays, dog. That's wild. I be tripping. What? What on earth did you just say? What meaning did you convey? Well, to the right ears, there was meaning conveyed, sure, but the important part to remember is that we do ourselves a disservice and we do the social cohesion a disservice when we rely on other people to do the mental interpretive labor for our language.
Yeah.
That is us abdicating the responsibility of increasing the clarity and resolution of our speech such that we minimize the labor necessary on the other person's part to understand us.
Right.
When we maximize our intelligibility, we've fulfilled our responsibility. If someone's not going to understand you at that point, not your fault. Cool. You've done everything that you need to do. But up to that point, we introduce ambiguity, and ambiguity introduces confusion and distortion and misunderstanding, and thus can broaden and widen the gap between two people and make relating in an authentic and vulnerable way that much more difficult.
Nice. I like that. The way that I've gone about for creating more precision is to remove as much of the soft talk and the ambiguous language. That's been a huge one for myself. And soft talk is probablys, mights, coulds, shoulds, try, all those all those ones. And a thought I had the other day was if you have to ask a question after the statement is not written or said solid enough. And so the example of that one would be, if I might be going to the party for 5 p.m. I could make it to the party for 5 p.m. I'm probably going to make it to the party for 5 p.m. I should make it to the party for 5 p.m. and so on. And then the question is, are you making it to the party for 5 p.m.? So it's not solid enough. So when we remove that ambiguity and we're just aware of it, then it's solid talk. It's, I'm going to the party at 5 p.m. And I actually find when it's something simple like that as well, where we're able to remove the solid talk, replace it with remove the soft talk, replace it with solid talk. What we give ourselves the opportunity to do is microdose decision making, because we're put in a place where we're making a decision rather than keeping it up in the air. And I think that when we make those small decisions, then it accumulates to being able to make those bigger decisions a lot easier. It's a lot smoother because we made all these micro decisions along the way, and we just became better and better and better and better as a side effect. And
decisiveness is an instantiation of personal power. And for those who are looking to make a decision to improve their lives, who are curious about breathwork and neuro-linguistic somatic experiencing, Kyle, where can they find you? How can they get in touch?
clarityconsultant.ca. I'm also at Dapper Dude Kyle. For actually all social platforms are Dapper Dude Kyle, DAPPERDUDE Kyle, KYLE. And that's pretty much it.
Great.
I'm on the
All
YouTubes.
of those links will be in the description too.
Sick.
Awesome. Kyle, as it has been, and I'm sure it will continue to be, this has been delightful, expansive, curious, and insightful. Thank you for your time, for your work, and again, for the generous offering of allowing me to experience your magic.
Dude, it was a blast, both the session and this podcast, meeting you. Very grateful. It's fantastic.
And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you could like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app, all of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.